I think we can start.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. You know, tonight is the fifth night of Sukkot. The festival of Sukkot is a festival where you leave your permanent structure, you leave your home, and you move into a temporary structure, knowing full well that the shade of Hashem, the protection of Hashem, is above you in the form of schach. Now, if you think about it, the year 2020 was one big Sukkot. Whatever we planned at the beginning of last year, things turned upside down. The whole world moved out of its comfort zone into some sort of temporary structure. And it's been the most challenging, the most opportunistic, the most unbelievable experience, to put it lightly. Tonight, we're going to hear two perspectives. The first, we're going to hear from Rabbi David Weinberg. He's a great teacher. He's a scholar. He's the rabbi of the Maria Road Shul in Cape Town. He founded the Tefillin Bank that gives the Chakovitz Tefillin Camp, the Tefillin Fund, that gives Tefillin to anybody who commits to put on Tefillin every day and can't afford it. He sponsors the Tefillin. But he is an outstanding speaker and with a very Kabbalistic insight. He's going to give us the rabbi's spiritual point of view of the sukkah that we're going through, the sukkahs that we're living through. And afterwards, we're going to hear from Rabbi David. Rabbi David is a very down-to-earth businessman who runs a business called Solutions Team. They create outdoor advertising, indoor advertising, they print on fabrics. But he's been through it. We're going to hear these two perspectives, the rabbis, the businessmen's, and afterwards it's going to develop into lively discussion. If there are any questions, they'll take them and answer them. But it's fascinating for these times. So without delay, I'm going to pass on to Rabbi Weinberg. Thank you both for making the time. Rabbi Weinberg, over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi Masinta. Good moed to you, to our fellow panelists, Reb Albert. It's really special to be together with you again, even virtually. The introduction that Rabbi Masinta gave is already 50% of my speech, but more succinctly and better put than I could have done it. So I'm not sure if that means you're going to get a whole new speech or it's just going to be half the time. I don't know which one, but we'll find out. But thank you for the warm introduction. And, you know, you talk about shaky times. The Masinta family just suffered a terrible loss in the passing of Rabbi Tanzra of Hashalom, Zichreinu Livracha, Chaya's father and Rabbi David's father-in-law and the Mishpacha. And I just want to take the opportunity, as the world is really shaking, to wish the family and the extended community who have suffered such a terrible loss only long life and nechama, comfort in this time. And Hashem gives us the koyach through Zman Simchaseinu, through the time of rejoicing. We should all be able to hold on to that instruction and that energy that the Eibusha gives us to actually tap into joy in this time, difficult on sometimes on a personal level, certainly difficult on a communal, on a global level. The challenges that we are facing are, you know, the probably the most prominent word is unprecedented. I don't know if everybody picked it up. I want to actually focus on it because there was this really cute tweet before Rosh Hashanah that said, leave it to the Jews to end 2020 early. You know, we talked about last year. The rest of the world is still suffering through 2020. They can't wait for it to end. We finished with it earlier. And yes, we had a Rosh Hashanah, and yes, we had a time of tremendous stock take. And yes, some people have argued that Rosh Hashanah already came 7 months ago in March, where we were forced to take stock in ways that really were unusual. But there's no question that what we're dealing with in this time raises a lot of existential questions and is disturbing. And before I start talking about it a little bit in detail in terms of a Torah and maybe a Hasidic perspective, I do want to make sure to be very clear that nowhere in this conversation should it ever be misunderstood or construed to be anything less than complete empathy and concern for the reality that we are dealing with. It's a tremendous challenge. It cannot be minimized on a financial, on an emotional, on a spiritual level. The world is experiencing a complete upheaval, and we don't have the answers, and we don't know not why and not how we're going to move from it. So neither of those questions can be answered today, but it is Sukkot. And on Sukkot, when we're looking at Sukkot, we are looking at a time where the word shaky is extremely apropos. We shake the lulav and esrog. Your sukkah might be a bit shaky. In Cape Town, if coronavirus wasn't enough to keep people away from shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I myself had to be in quarantine over Yom Kippur and couldn't be in shul, as was my family. If that wasn't enough, God sent us winds that were also unprecedented, up to 200 and something kilometer-hour winds that blew down most sukkahs in the Sea Point area, and my sach had to go up 3 times. So that was also shaky, and that's the reality we're in. So what's going on? So I want to try and address a perspective with a simple question, and that is, how come most first-generation wealth doesn't make it to the third generation? How is it that most people who make their money cannot pass that money on to a third generation? There was a study done about 5 years ago in the United States with 443 billionaires. And what they learned was that of the 405, 6 years ago, that was a lot of billionaires. That was the world's vast majority of billionaires. And what they learned was that less than 10% of the billionaires in 2014 were third generation wealth. Anybody who knows anything about money knows that money is supposed to make money, that you have compounded interest, that the longer you let money sit and develop and earn, the more it makes for you. And yet, of the 443 billionaires who were surveyed, less than 10% were actually third generation wealth. 80% were first generation. And that is a remarkable statistic, because what it tells us is that, strangely enough, people who make money and bucket loads of it are not able to usually hand it over to a third generation. It doesn't go cross generation. How come? And the answer is very, very instructive, and I think helps us start creating a context to the world around us. Because, we tend to think that when things go in a way that is completely unexpected, that this is at what we call a detour. Somehow life is not going in the right direction, and it throws us a loop, and we don't really know how to deal with it. We go for therapy, we go for spiritual guidance, we go into a depression, we get worried. Why me? Now, there's something that first generation wealth knows that third generation wealth doesn't know. And that is that you always get thrown a loop. First generation wealth created, so to speak, the money. Those individuals had to work harder than ever, save every penny with tremendous care, and ultimately go through tremendous challenges to eventually reach the point of reaching a certain level of wealth. What do they then do? They then ensure that their children should never have to go through the challenges they went through. Their mantra becomes, I never want you to have to go through what I went through. Okay? So the child won't know hunger, won't know the fear of uncertainty, of where the next monthly paycheck comes from, won't know what happens and the fear of a deal not happening and the impact that it can have on the entire family, not to say the individual itself. They won't know that. But what they also don't know is that they haven't built up the antibodies. They haven't built up the strength, the skills to actually hold on to and deal with the realities of struggles that life always brings. And here is the context of prayer that we say on Yom Kippur. This year I had to say it and sing it at home with my family. Kihine kachomer. Kihine kachomer is a beautiful liturgical piece that speaks about how we are completely in Hashem's hands. Whether we are like the steering wheel on a ship in the hands of the captain, clay in the hands of a potter, whatever simile and metaphor the poetry imagines, the refrain is the same. Kein anachnu biyadcha. So too are we, Hashem, in your hands. And this idea of imagining ourselves in Hashem's hands creates a certain response to the inevitable uncertainties that life will always throw at us. And this is the idea that ultimately we have lived in a world over the last few decades where we have simply created an imaginary reality that life is supposed to simply work out. to a large degree. The weather is supposed to cooperate. The markets are supposed to cooperate. People are supposed to respond as we need them to. People are supposed to be healthy. We're expected to be healthy every day. It's remarkable to me as a rabbi how many people go into a crisis when there's a health issue. Now, of course, if you don't have health, you have nothing. Of course, we need our health. But what gives us a right to imagine that our health is meant to be perfect and exactly right every single day? Who promised us to get up in the morning and we're going to be healthy? At the end of the day, we have no guarantees of these things. We have no guarantees at all. And yet, we have told ourselves a story that that's the way it's supposed to be. And if it's not, Rabbi, why me? Rabbi, what did I do wrong? I thought I was a good person. What happened to this person? They're good, decent people. Now, of course, we should be troubled by pain. We should be troubled by the challenges that people go through. But the idea that it's not supposed to happen is contrary to reality. And first generation wealth, in other words, those who have boxed on, those who have been forced through one circumstance or another, and nobody asks for it, but those who have actually had to fight through the trenches of one crisis or another and have come through, they know that. They have gotten what you can call the antibodies, if you want to use a word very relevant today for our coronavirus. They have developed antibodies to dealing with crisis and uncertainty. In other words, I'd like to suggest that the only difference between pre-COVID and post-COVID is that pre-COVID, we convinced ourselves that we were in control. We convinced ourselves that we can manage whatever comes. Post-COVID, we've learned that's not true. It's a complete farce and it's a mirage. It's an illusion. We are never in control. We have never been in control. All we can do every day is try our best and react. The rest of it, we are in Hashem's hands. If you take a little simple thought experiment and you imagine, take a family that is fleeing as a refugee family, let's say from Syria. There's been millions of refugees from Syria gone through Europe. And imagine this family going, including a tiny infant in her mother's arms. And imagine that this family goes and leaves Syria and eventually somehow gets to Greece and then manages to get to the borders of Hungary and has gone through swamplands and rejected at borders and shot at. Who knows what this family's had to endure. If at any point of that journey you ask the baby, thought experiment, where have you been for the last 3 months? They're not going to tell you, oh, I got stuck at a border, I saw barbed wire, I was shot at. The baby has been in one place all the time, in her mother's arms. Kein anachnu biyadcha. So too Hashem, we are always in your hands. And the only difference between feeling ensconced in the hands of God and feeling complete turmoil and confusion is whether we are ready to actually acknowledge that we are not in control of everything, that we are in Hashem's hands and that He is guiding. And whatever comes our way, He will give us the strength to deal with, because He has given us the challenge in the first place. The Baal Shem Tov teaches that the schach spiritually originates in the keteris, in the incense that the high priest would offer in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. And from that cloud created in the Holy of Holies that had to fill up the entire room, creates the spiritual origin of the schach, the cloud of glory, represented by the schach, the foliage that we put on top of our sukkah. And the Rabbi asks in a talk in 1961 to try and understand what is the connection. What is the connection between these two? And what lesson is it for us? If you take it a little bit further as well, another connection. Our sages point out that the word schach has the numerical equivalent of 100. Samach, Chaf, 60, 20, and 20. And that is representative of the 100 blasts that we sound on Rosh Hashanah. So Sukkot and the Sukkah and the Schach is a continuum of the journey that we began on Rosh Hashanah, entered into the Holy Holies on Yom Kippur, and eventually sit ensconced in the Sukkah on Sukkot. What is the connection? And so the Rebbe teaches that what we have here is two extremes. One extreme is the extreme of holiness, the holiest day of the year, the holiest place in the world, the Holy of Holies, in Jerusalem, in the temple, on the Temple Mount, in the westernmost part, in God's Holy of Holies, and the holiest person, the high priest himself. And the incense and the great service that he brings at this moment when he's in this place. That's the pinnacle and peak of holiness. Now let's go to look at the schach. The schach is the exact polar opposite. What is the schach? The schach is nothing of value. You're not allowed to use, let's say you decide you had a good financial year, you want to use gold to cover your sukkah, an overlay, silver, another precious metal. You're not allowed to do that. You have to use specifically vegetation. So you say, okay, I want to use vegetation that is alive, that is thriving, that is connected to the ground, that will grow, that will produce a beautiful smell in my sukkah. No, you have to use vegetation that has specifically been cut from the ground and disconnected from its source and is essentially a castaway. It's something that you discard. You know, interestingly enough, when I walked through the streets of Sea Point on Sukkot this year, the entire streets were full of schach because the wind blew down so many trees and so many branches, huge trees, huge. I mean, ones that were a couple meters in diameter at least, ripped out of the ground from this wind. And there in the corner is cut up wood and branches. It's refuse. What does a Jew see when he sees the refuse on the side of the street? He sees schach. So here we have the two extremes. Peak of holiness and the peak of rejection. And they're connected. One actually comes from the other. When we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the most fundamental Jewish prayer, what are we saying? Hashem Echad. What? He doesn't have competition? You're the best. You're the biggest. There's nothing else. What are we saying? Hashem Echad means there's one God and there's only one reality. The reality that God is deciding at this moment. There is no moment when we are thrown away. There's no moment when we are, God forbid, abandoned. There's no moment when we are on our own. There's no moment when God is more invested or, God forbid, less invested. Each moment that we deal with, the highs and the lows, are godly moments. They are instructions from Hashem given to us specifically to build up, for whatever reason he wants, the challenge and the antibody at this moment. And it is this idea of the sukkah that we have to absorb into our minds and into our hearts at this time. Because the only difference between before COVID and after COVID is that the illusion has been burst. The idea that there is certainty in life outside of Hashem's arms is false. It never existed. And yet, in times of plenty, we convince ourselves. We tell ourselves stories. And then things get difficult. May they get better quickly. And may Hashem protect us quickly. But when they get difficult, we have to remember that it is the same plan and the same control from the same man above, and we are still in his arms. The Arizal points out a beautiful interpretation of a law, a technical law in the laws of Sukkah. You see, the Mishnah teaches us that the minimum of a Sukkah has to be 2 walls and a bit. It's a machlokes in the Mishnah. That's the halacha. 2 walls and a bit more. And as long as you can cover that space with a little bit of schach and it has the minimum dimensions within it, it's a kosher sukkah. But what is the significance of 2 walls and a bit? Why would we even imagine that this would be who built something in such a structure? 2 walls and a bit. Says the Arizal that the 2 walls and a bit are a simile for an embrace. When you hug somebody, something that we don't know today with social distancing, but when you hug somebody, you create 2 walls and a bit. It's an embrace. The sukkah is Hashem embracing us. It feels shaky. A beautiful, beautiful description of our discussion today. And the reality, it feels so shaky. It feels so uncertain. We have no idea what tomorrow will bring, even today, how it's going to turn out. Things are so difficult. But we have to know one thing, that this is the time to stand up and claim our sukkah is a gift of Zman Simchatenu to say, it might be difficult. You don't know how the schach will stay on your sukkah, but you have to dance and you have to rejoice and you have to know that you are always in Hashem's arms. And I pray that we go from this challenge and this difficulty into a new year. It's still 2020, but it's a whole new year, Tafshin Pei Aleph, a year of revealed miracles and wonders. And I pray that we go into it where it feels right, where it feels good, where we don't have the fear in an obvious way. But regardless of what the next step is in our life, we should know that we are always in Hashem's hands. And from there, we can feel the comfort, the protection, and the confidence to take a step forward. Moed Tov and Chag Sameach.
Albert, over to you. David, it was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Rabbi Weinberg, it's very humbling to speak after you. It's also an honor and a privilege to be in the same forum as you. And thank you to Rabbi Masinta for putting this together and giving me the opportunity. So, lessons from these shaky times, or for these shaky times. I started by thinking about exactly that, about the sukkah, the word shaky and shaking the lulav. And I realized that as much as we believed pre-COVID that our lives were rock solid and we had our own plans and we knew where we were going, our lives are very much like a sukkah, and that it doesn't take much to shake the foundations of our lives and to shake the foundations of that sukkah and to completely uproot everything that we believed in and everything that we thought was true. The biggest single lesson that I learned early on was that we believe we are in control of our own lives. And the reality is that we're not. Hashem is in control. And for people in business, in life, who thrive on control, it was mind-blowing. It took, for me personally, a tremendous amount of time to adjust to not being in control, to not being able to do what I wanted when I wanted, whether it was in my personal life or in my business life. From a business point of view, a number of massive lessons have come out. I think, first of all, in times of crisis, people's true characters reflect. And we've noticed people showing the absolute best of the best, but at the same time, we've also unfortunately noticed that people show the worst of the worst, and people become very selfish and very introspective and think only of themselves. And the lesson that I took out of that was that when we're faced with a common problem, a common threat, if we don't pull together, if we don't work together as a people, believing in Hashem, knowing that we have our own part to play, then we get left behind. And we as a company have taken an attitude that we're not going to be chasing after the people who owe us money to their detriment, that we're going to work with them rather than work against them, that we're not going to be retrenching people just for the sake of retrenching. We've taken a decision to rather take salary cuts across the board, giving the more senior people the bigger salary cuts, so that we could ensure that everyone had a job to come back to once this crisis was over. And it's unbelievable how small acts like that, by loyalty, by compassion, by long-term acceptance of ourselves. I've learned a number of things. People's integrity gets blurred during times of crisis. The way that people are prepared to compromise their values in order to survive. And people go into survival mode instead of planning for success, instead of planning for the future, instead of planning for the long term, how do we survive right now has been a mantra that I've heard over and over and over from other business people. And it's those people who are so short-sighted, who haven't got the ability to understand that it's not just about today. It's not just about getting through this crisis. It's about doing what's right for themselves, for the people around them, for their families, for humanity, just to be decent human beings, and not allowing emotion to rule their decision making. As we learn in Tanya, your head should rule your decisions, not your heart. And too many people are reacting in an emotional way rather than divorcing the emotion from the facts and taking lessons out of the crisis and turning it into a positive. So my oldest daughter is busy writing matric at the moment, and everyone tells me, shame, it must be so difficult for a young girl to be writing matric during this time of lockdown, etc. Not being able to go to school, having to learn online. And she's the one who brought out the positive. And as a young lady, turned around to me and said, Dad, the best thing about writing matric during lockdown is that there hasn't been any social distractions. So I've been able to really focus on my work and do what I need to do in order to get the best possible matric results. And I think that's the secret in everything. Try and find the brocha in absolutely everything. If one can always try and look for the positive, Hashem blessed us with free choice. And why not choose to look for the positives, to be happy, to choose good over bad, choose positive over negative, choose happiness over unhappiness. I have on my WhatsApp profile, attitude determines altitude. And I live by that motto. I have learned through not just this lockdown crisis, but through other crises within my business, how easy it would be to quit, how easy it would be to just give up and throw my hands in the air and say, I'm giving up. I've chosen. I've used my free choice to fight, to learn from my mistakes, to learn from the environment around me, to surround myself with people who are smarter than me and wiser than me and more experienced than me. I've learned how to use my resources wisely. I've acknowledged and accepted responsibility for any of my actions that haven't delivered positive results. And very importantly, I don't concern myself with what others think about me. And I fought on. And what's happened is that from a business point of view, I had a business that was like a sukkah. It was perfectly fine in good weather. But as soon as a storm came along, whether that storm was called COVID-19 or that storm was whatever it could be, as soon as that storm came along, that sukkah shook and got very, very fragile. The lessons I've learned have allowed me to build a far stronger, far more permanent structure. I'd like to believe, without sounding arrogant, I'd like to believe it's what our third base of Mikdash will be. Something solid, something with deep foundations, something that will last for many, many, many years. Rabbi Weinberg, I want to touch very quickly on what you said about the third generation not being able to maintain the wealth. And it's the one thing that has carried me through. I believe that there isn't the appreciation and sense of gratitude that the third generation, those that receive anything too easily, don't have the sense of gratitude and appreciation of those that have to work for it. And I got over my lack of control by focusing every single day on those things that I have to be grateful for. And I developed an attitude of gratitude over and above the morning brachas, etc., etc. I spend 10 minutes every day just going in my head, thanking Hashem for the countless brachas. Most importantly, I never underestimate the importance and power of my family, who have been absolute rock solid support to me. And of them, I'm truly grateful. And I'd like to wish everyone a bracha that this year is a year of absolute revealed brachas, revealed miracles, revealed goodness in the world, and that we take away from all this shaky period lessons to improve, lessons to become better in business, better husbands, better fathers, better sons, better spouses, better in every single aspect of our lives. Thank you very much.
Guys, thank you so much. Albert, just a question for you. Just tell us a little bit about your business. Did you inherit it? Has it gone through? Just tell us a bit about your business and your history.
So
Were you
I
always in this
started
business? Just tell us a bit about your history.
Okay. So a lot of you will know this, that I haven't always had the best life. I haven't always had the most kosher of lives. So I'm going to just fast forward to the part where my life turned around and I started this particular business. I started this business over 20 years ago. And for many years, Hashem blessed me unbelievably well, and everything came really easy. I got to a point where I wasn't needing to put too much effort into the business in order to make it work. And a couple of years ago, so first of all, the business is large format digital print. We do large format printing, and our market segment is absolutely anyone from the local corner spaza shop to the biggest of multinationals. And a few years ago, I gave away shares in my business to two people as a retention strategy. Never asked them to pay for them, never asked them to sign any sureties. I never asked them to put any money into the business. And about 18 to 24 months ago, these same two people decided that they wanted more. And they were behaving in a very unethical manner. They hadn't been pulling their weight. They hadn't been doing what was needed to do to grow the business and to maintain the business. And I attribute it to exactly what I spoke about earlier. They got something for nothing, therefore there was no appreciation, no gratitude. And I made a decision to get rid of them. I bought them out at tremendous cost to the business. And as much as I regret having spent that amount of money on people who I don't believe deserved it, at the same time, they were so negative in my world that I would have probably spent 10 times the amount just to get rid of them. So a bit of a dichotomy. And I've been rebuilding the business from scratch. I started the business, I've nurtured the business, I've grown the business. It's just exited its teenage years and has become a young 20-year-old individual entity. And it's now poised and structured and ready to really take the world by storm. And a lot of it has to do with the hardships that I've gone through, not the good times that I went through. Thank you.
There's been a few questions on the group. I'll deal with one. Maybe Albert, you wanna talk in over here as well. Come in. I'm looking for the question now. It wasn't on the chat. I think there's a question for Q&A. Okay, there's a Q&A option here and a chat one. Wow, very interesting. So the Q&A, a fellow Adam Zartz from Cape Town. Hi, Adam. Asks the question of how do you continue to grow and develop as a leader? It's a bit of a broad question, But I think that the answer is exactly this. It's the willingness to deal with the difficult moments, and to make them not about yourself, that develops leadership. One of the most important elements of leadership is that it's not you don't get the title with a salary check. You don't get the title with a name on your door or nameplate. Leadership has nothing to do with position or power. Leadership is a state of mind, and it's earned through the willingness to rise above yourself, precisely in difficult moments. So I think that it is times like this that really develops leaders, and that allows those with the leadership potential are willing to rise above themselves and their immediate need, as Albert so beautifully described.
Adam, I think, or Rabbi, I've lost. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, Adam, I think one of the secrets to growing and developing as a leader is accepting responsibility for those that you lead, and accepting responsibility for your own actions. Everyone wants rights. Everyone wants to be a leader. Everyone wants the plus side. Everyone wants the benefits of everything. Very few people are willing to take on the responsibility of what it means to do that. So being an effective leader encompasses listening, being proactive, being inclusive, but ultimately it also means taking responsibility. And the example I gave earlier, where I made the decision not to retrench people, but rather to take salary cuts across the board, was one of those decisions that wasn't very popular, wasn't probably in the best interest of my business for the short term, but was definitely in the best interest of the people that I lead and the company that I lead for the long term. So it's being prepared to make those hard decisions and live with the consequences of those decisions. And then acknowledging when you've mucked up. If you've made a mistake, acknowledge it, learn from it, and move on from it. I think that's as much as I can share about that.
Guys, how do you see the year ahead? Both Rabbi Weinberg, from all the people that you meet and deal with and counsel, both you, Albert, how do you see the year ahead genuinely?
So you mentioned my name, so I'll take it up first, not because I have a better answer or more insight than Albert, probably the contrary. I think it's one big question mark. It's clear that in every challenge, there are opportunities, there are growth lessons, no question about it. But in the short term, the pain is real, and the uncertainty is debilitating. And the challenges that we are facing is incredible. Strangely enough, in South Africa, there are two interesting pluses. Number one, we're dealing with a crisis that the world is dealing with, and not just us. For change, it's not just us in a crisis; it's the whole world. We have good company, and therefore, usually the South African response, if I can say this, is to say, "Okay, I need to leave South Africa because here there's a crisis, and somewhere else there isn't. For once, there's nowhere to run to. Where are you going to go that it's much better? This situation is really a global." So that's interesting in terms of the South African context. It's almost comforting to know everybody's dealing with this, not just us. And the second point here with South Africa is that remarkably, to this point, we've experienced revealed blessing in terms of the health of our country, in terms of the numbers versus the predictions, in terms of where we are versus where people thought we would be. And we are very blessed as a country to be at the place we are. We need to be vigilant. We need to be careful. But I do think that people who are able to notice the broader sort of positive news of South Africa in this situation, health-wise, are able to have a little bit more hope going forward. But beyond that, I would say that it's we are ready for a very challenging questionable time. I'm an optimist by nature. I can't claim it as a matter of faith. And I do believe that we're going to come out of this very strong. I do believe this is going to be very good for our country ultimately, and that we're going to see tremendous benefits in terms of people's own, development. I believe that for our youth, they're the luckiest youth of many generations, because they have learned and developed the antibodies to crisis, which we and our parents did not learn, because we haven't had global crises over the last 50, 60 years. So, our youth are very lucky in that way, and it's going to make a much stronger, resilient, more philosophical youth, I believe, than we were growing up. And that's a positive thing. Beyond that, Rabbi Masinta, you're much smarter than me. You can probably tell us where we're going.
Rabbi, let's hear from you. What do you think in the year ahead?
I echo a lot of Rabbi Weinberg's thoughts and feelings. I think that we are going to definitely come out of this better, stronger, smarter, wiser, having had a common problem globally. I was excited when COVID first came out. I was truly, truly excited about it, because I thought for the first time in known history, the entire global population has a common enemy, so to speak, which isn't another population. It's an alien enemy. And this, if anything, is ever going to pull the world together, regardless of religion, of race, of gender, of nationality, of anything, if anything's going to pull the world together, it's having this one common viral enemy. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. But I think that just in general, people do grow from pressure. The same way as you get the best oil for the menorah by squeezing and crushing the olives, so we're getting squeezed and crushed at the moment. And I think we're going to find that you'll have the best of people coming out of it. And there'll be one or two people who will show their true colors. And when they show their true colors, people will know what to expect from them. So they won't be able to hide behind pretenses anymore. From an economic point of view, I truly hope that our country learns from the backlash of what's happened during.
Can I just, I hope I'm still on here. Can I just jump?
Which is what we needed.
Can I just jump to something a little bit off topic? However, the peace between, and this is to you, Rabbi Weinberg, the peace between the UAE and Israel, and putting into the mix the promise of the prophets that one day there'll be peace and anti-Semitism will fall away, etc., etc. In your view, and if you could elaborate on it, and your genuine view, the peace between UAE and Israel is good for the Jews or not good for the Jews?
That's throwing me for a loop. I don't remember seeing that in the title. And why you think I have an insight into that more than anybody else, basically. But okay, once you ask me the question, I'm going to take the bait. I'm not convinced about the peace agreement with the UAE. There's a number of levels that I'm concerned about. So I don't know that it's, everything is Mashiach's times and everything is leading us to a better place. And I do think that there's a warmth in the relationship of peoples that is heartwarming, and that certainly gives a person reason to hope. But there has been this narrative that the peace with the UAE is the first time that it's been without any compromises or sellouts by Israel. And I'm not a security expert, but the fact that the UAE is going to be getting F-35s and Growlers and other highly, highly sophisticated systems for the United States is a very big concern, and is something that makes me very worried about the cost of opening up these things. It feels good. There's no question about it. And in the short term, there's no question that it's been very positive. There's no question, at least from my feeling, that the expression of peace and respect is mutual, and that for maybe the first time, we're seeing in the Arab world an openness to Yiddishkeit in a very tangible way. And that is good. But the cost of getting there, with an imbalance of the security of the Middle East, for it should be for Israel's side, is a very big worry, and one that we have to be honest about in recognizing and addressing this issue. So, is there a change? Yes, I think there's a change. I think the most important change in that relationship happened when President Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Not because the embassy ended up in Jerusalem. We know that Jerusalem's our capital, whether the embassy is there or not. But because the Arab world didn't freak out, and you didn't have the expressions of Armageddon that have been predicted if we mess with Jerusalem, the third rail of Israeli, Middle East politics, and all these cliches. And it revealed that at the end of the day, the Arab world has bigger issues than Israel and Jerusalem and Judaism. And that you're seeing in the UAE as a very positive expression, that at the end of the day, the Arab world is making a greater peace with the reality of Israel and with the Jewish people. And maybe that's a reform in Islam, which I would very much welcome, if I can be so bold as to say that. But in terms of a peace deal, that Israel is strong militarily, and that we don't need it anymore, because the promise of the prophets, the cherev leisaver ba'artzachem, that no sword will ever have to pass through our land, will come true with the coming of Mashiach, and we can all live as the prophet spoke about, all the nations and sukkahs coming to the temple, recognizing Hashem as the ultimate sovereign and living in peace together.
Albert, we'd like to hear from you. I thought it was very insightful, Rabbi Weinberg. How do you see it?
I'm not very politically astute. I do believe that peace is good for the world, and I hope and pray that it's something that is long-lasting and mutually beneficial, and that everyone gets to grow and benefit from it.
Well, gentlemen, we're running out of time. It should be just a good year for everybody, materialistically and spiritually. I'm going to pass over to Aaron now. Thank you both for making your time. Aaron.
Thank you.
Good morning, Rabbi Weinberg and Albert. Thank you so much for joining in tonight's webinar, giving of your time. Rabbi Weinberg, thank you for the Rabbi's perspectives, giving us the mitzvahs and the spiritual sense of the mitzvahs and the current mitzvahs, the way they relate to our day-to-day lives. So thank you. 1 second, I need to mute someone. And Albert, thank you so much for the businessman's perspective. During this financial uncertainty, we most certainly, everybody needs to hear that, and also relating it to Sukkot and giving us all the vital lessons for these shaky times. So thank you so much. And to everyone that joined in, thank you for joining us. Please join us tomorrow night as we have another webinar, our grandparents and parents and dealing with depression, which is also seemingly a big issue that we are dealing with in today's times. Have a great evening and a good moed.
Moed Tov. And everybody,
Thank
you so much for your thoughts and words. Moed Tov.
Moed Tov. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you all. Aaron, thank you very much.
Mm-mm.